On September 4th, 1981, 12-year-old Tim Slaten and 15-year-old Jeff Slaten had their childhood suddenly finished when they found their mom, Linda Slaten, dead in her room at their apartment in Lakeland, Florida. She was found lying partially naked, beaten, and with a metal hanger around her neck. Who might have carried out such a terrible wrongdoing? Might it at any point have been somebody near the family? Or, on the other hand, was this random attack? Welcome back to Friday 13 Crime, where we shed light on cold cases around the world. Today we're investigating the situation of Linda Slaten, a case so wound you'll be stunned when you figure out who killed her. So moving along, let's get started. This is Lakeland, Florida, perhaps one of the most populous cities in Polk County. Back in 1981, Lakeland was a spot with many flourishing businesses and residential areas. These neighborhoods were loaded up with duplexes and generally had a place with affectionate families that had a great deal of small kids. The region was likewise loaded up with lavish green grass every step of the way, which made this place homely. At 303 North Brunel Road, where Linda and her two young boys lived, there were many duplexes. The family owed one, however, they hadn't remained there for extremely lengthy. Sources said that Linda and her two children moved from Hartselle, Alabama, to Lakeland, Florida, 14 days before the occurrence occurred. What might have prompted her death? Might it be that she brought an old vengeance to a new place? Linda Patterson Slaten was brought into the world on March 8, 1950. When she was 16, she was pregnant with her first child, Jeffrey Slaten. After 3 years, she brought forth a subsequent child, Timothy Slaten. Before long, she managed to convince the dad of her two sons, Frank Slaten, to get married so they could begin a proper family. In any case, a cheerful family was a long way from what she got. Straight to the point ended up being an abusive husband who might regularly mishandle her and the two children. Plagued by his alcoholism and addiction, he would turn violent at whatever point he became drunk. Jeff and Tim review that their dad would frequently transform into the beast. He was a fierce drunkard and would beat them three with no still, without any conscience. Linda started to think about filing a divorce. Furthermore, in 1974, Linda Slaten at last turned out to be free. She divorced from Jeff and Tim's abusive dad, Frank Slaten, following 9 horrific years of their marriage. Linda began her new life as a single parent with 2 sons. She made an honest effort to accommodate her family and show up for her children as a mindful mother. Shuffling work. Clearly, she had restricted monetary abilities. They didn't have a car, so her children, Jeff and Tim, would frequently go to school either by walking or by sharing rides in the event that they were offered one. Aside from school, Jeff and Tim cherished playing football, but they didn't have a ride to practice. Their coach, Joe, would frequently get them and drop them off at or close by their home. 7 days before the 4th of September, Linda was setting up her home to invite her mother. She wanted her mother to move in since she thought her presence in the house would help get it in order and make it more homely. Her sister, Judy, would likewise frequently drop by to visit her. During her visits, the sisters spend their time together over a hot cup of espresso. Notwithstanding, on the 4th of September 1981, around 8:30 a.m., Judy showed up at Linda's loft to find something she never expected to see. On the 3rd of September 1981, the night prior to the homicide, Jeff Slaten got back home from football training. However, when he don't track down anything to eat at home, he went to his grandparents' place. At around 9:30 p.m., Jeff arrived at back home just to find the house unfilled. Around 11:30 p.m., Linda and Tim, her more youthful child, returned home. She referenced going to a neighbor's place to play a round of cards. In any case, before that, she got comfortable to finish her tasks, and Jeff saw his mother doing the dishes. Tim, then again, went sleep. Close to this time, her child, Jeff, came dependent upon her and apologized, since the two had battled before that day. As they made up, Linda expressed goodnight to her young men. Jeff said these words, "I love you, Mother. I'll see you tomorrow." He had no idea these were the last words he would say to her. September 4th, 1981. Around 8:30 a.m., Judy showed up at Linda's loft. She went up to Linda's room and thumped on the entryway 2 times. There was no response. She figured Linda could in any case be sleeping. However, it was surprising as Linda normally awakened before the young boys left for school. As she advanced out of the house, she saw something bizarre. The window in Linda's room had a missing sheet, and what's more, the window was completely open. Judy got back to Linda's room once more, and this time made the wafer track down Linda Slaten's inert body. She shouted. This grabbed the eye of a caretaker to the house, and he promptly called 911. Linda was found dead with a wire clothes hanger around her neck. Her body was to some degree naked, and she lay right across the bed with her head down on the floor. There were no indications of battle. Her cabinet was totally open. Aside from that, the wide range of various things in her room were in their typical spots. Inside only minutes, the Lakeland police, journalists, and medical services arrived. The yellow sign perusing crime location "Don't enter" was spread all around Linda's home. Tim and Jeff were both stirred by cops and were approached to leave their home, which was currently a crime location. While Jeff had the option to move beyond his mom's room without seeing her death body, Tim saw his mom one final time, however this time she wasn't alive. The two were then shipped off live with their grandparents awaiting additional investigation. Linda was 31 years of age when she was killed. When her children, Tim and Jeff, were sent away to their grandparents, Sergeant Edgar Pickett from the Lakeland Police Office showed up at the crime location. He was the person who drove the case, yet additionally tracked down pivotal proof at the crime location. Toward the start of the investigation, Sergeant Edgar tracked down a couple of prints in Linda's room. The greater part of the prints had a place with the departed Linda Slaten. In any case, there was one print that didn't have a place with her. It was a palm print. The palm print was found on Linda's room. It was the very windowsill that had a missing window sheet. To figure out what truly befell Linda Slaten, she was taken for a post-mortem examination. There, they tracked down a few stamps and injuries around her arms, shoulders, and neck. Likewise, when her body was found, she was to some degree naked, which might have been proof of rape. In the wake of running the dissection, it was resolved that she had been ruthlessly beaten right away, then, at that point, physically attacked, and afterward choked to death with a metal hanger from her own pantry. All of the proof found, the palm print was the most pivotal, as it could distinguish the guilty party on the spot with a match. Yet, legal DNA examination didn't exist in those days. To figure out who could have been dependable, the police had to overlay her family tree. The main suspect was Frank Slaten, Linda's ex. Back in 1975, at the time she separated from Frank, Linda expressed that he had an aggressive character. He was oppressive and didn't deal with his family. It was no question that he would be considered an individual of interest for this situation. He was brought in for questioning. Notwithstanding, when the officers looked into his whereabouts the night Linda was killed, they observed that he was at home in Alabama. And still, after all that, they stayed dubious of him. The subsequent suspect was Linda's own child, Jeff Slaten. For what reason did the authorities consider him a suspect? Indeed, before Linda was killed, Jeff Slaten had a warmed contention with his mom. Jeff had an exceptionally close, at this point, far-off relationship with his mom. He, being the oldest child, felt the strain of living in a family with an aggressive dad and later with a single mother. There were sure times when Jeff and his mom would frequently get on one another's terrible side. However, he generally tried to compensate for it. The evening of the homicide, Jeff made up with his mom prior to hitting the hay. The police interrogated him concerning the occurrence. They even advised him to take 2 polygraph tests. At the point when he passed, the police got him from the rundown free from suspects. The third suspect was Linda's sweetheart. At that point, Linda, a single parent, had begun dating somebody. The white male, who stays anonymous, had a cozy relationship with her and her children. Nonetheless, when police ran a record verification and polygraph tests, he was cleared. At this point, they were running out of suspects, until by September 2001, they got a tip. Nearly 12 months after Linda was killed, there was gossip around a 24-year-old person who carried out a comparative wrongdoing. His name was Jimmy Ulmer. At that point, he was connected to a wrongdoing where he got a 10-year-old young lady through her window and almost killed her. At the point when the police ran a beware of him, they observed that he was indicted for 80 years to jail time. Likewise, the way that his wrongdoings in Linda's case were strikingly comparable. To finish it off, at the hour of the homicide, Jimmy was found remaining in a similar apartment building as Linda did. The proof found against him made the police think he was the excellent suspect. Be that as it may, there was a disadvantage. Jimmy had died while the investigation was going on, so it wasn't feasible for a DNA match. That would mean they'd need to uncover his body to play out the test. Fortunately, Jimmy's mom permitted a DNA test and got his sample. In any case, when the outcomes returned, there was no match, if not for the family or the nearby convict, who might have killed Linda. Around this time, the days had transformed into weeks, and afterward months. In Lakeland, detectives viewed at others too, yet nobody was at any point charged. Also, with no new leads, the case turned cold. The Slaten brothers needed to confront another reality throughout everyday life. Their mom was gone, and they had just their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris. While the investigation was going on, Linda's parents and sons held a funeral for her. What's more, before long, they began to return to carrying on with their lives and normal schedules. The brothers returned to school. Tim got once again into playing football. He even reviews right up till now that his partners and mentor were extremely strong. At the point when he didn't have a ride back home to his grandparents, Coach Joe would in any case take him to and from training. After a month, Tim balanced a photo of his group on his room wall. That image gave him the inspiration to pull past everything and push ahead. In the years that followed, the youthful brothers who just lost their mom developed into men who really focused and cherished on their family. Jeff got married and went to have 2 kids. Tim also got married. As time passed by, the 2 brothers would every now and again check in with the Lakeland detectives to see what sort of improvement was being made on their mother's case. Jeff Slaten actually reviews the night that Linda was killed. "I didn't hear anything, and it's so hard to live like that." Indeed, even Linda's neighbors expressed that they heard nothing uncommon the night she was killed. Notwithstanding the way that Jeff and Tim had each made fruitful lives for themselves, they ensured that the case was pushing ahead. 17 years had passed since Linda's passing. The police endured in their investigation. By 1998, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had left his situation, and the Slaten case was relegated to the new investigation group. Investigator Brad Grice was allotted to this case. While going through the bits of proof, he found unidentified DNA from the Slaten case that had been gathered back in 1981. He sent this to the state's significant investigative laboratory at the Florida Division of Policing, otherwise called the FDLE. By 1999, the investigative laboratory at the FDLE had the option to separate and foster a full DNA profile of Linda Slaten's obscure executioner. Yet again, subsequent to getting the DNA profile, he then went through the rundown of suspects. At the point when the siblings showed up, Detective Grice gathered their DNA tests and sent them for additional testing. At the point when the outcomes returned, there was no match. Jeff's name was totally cleared from the case. Frank Slaten was the following subject of investigation. As of now, Frank had quit any pretense of drinking. He seemed to have lost a portion of his aggressive and abusive tendencies. Tim and Jeff were additionally ready to meet their dad during this time and retouch a portion of the injuries from an earlier time. Plain consented to send his DNA for testing. The DNA, in any case, didn't match the speculative unidentified DNA profile that the analyst accepted would highlight the killer. Analyst Grice presented the unidentified DNA profile from the Slaten case to the FBI's public DNA data set in 2005, where it was persistently cross-referred to with recently submitted DNA tests. He dispensed with many suspects through the course of his examination utilizing DNA proof. Nonetheless, he resigned in 2015 in the wake of expenditure 17 years on the Slaten case. After Detective Grice, the Slaten case was appointed to new investigators Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. Investigator Tammy learned 3 years into the investigation that the FDLE had fostered a weighty innovation that could be useful to in recognizing any unidentifiable DNA. Making the most of the opportunity, the investigator sent C.C. Moore, a hereditary genealogist who worked for the FDLE, the unidentified DNA from the Slaten case. The public genealogy website, GEDmatch, which is run by C.C. Moore, produced a list of people who shared DNA with the unidentified killer after she uploaded the anonymous DNA from the Slaten case there. She then utilized birth certificate, marriage certificate, obituaries, and web-based entertainment to make a family tree. As the investigation went further, Moore made 3 genealogy branches for the killer, which assisted her with recognizing the one individual who was probably going to be answerable for the killing of Linda Slaten. The genealogical record worked off the DNA profile showed that he was very likely the individual who killed Linda Slaten. It was here that the bend got so odd that it even stunned Tim and Jeff Slaten. This was the image that held tight Tim's room wall, and the individual simply over his shoulder was Joseph Clinton Mills, frequently called Coach Joe. In the wake of learning the executioner's name, Detective Tammy and Russell continued ahead with Joseph Mills' background check. They then, at that point, revealed a few violations committed by him. One of them was committing great burglary by manufacturing a document. Despite the fact that he was never charged for it, the police got his palm and fingerprints. Furthermore, as you might review, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had found a palm print on the windowsill at the crime location. This implied that the family of the deceased could finally receive closure in the cold case which had been open for over 40 years right now. Investigators looked at the palm prints taken in 1981 from Linda Slaten's windowsill to Mills's palm print. What's more, they found a match. Yet, investigators actually expected to look at a recent DNA test from the suspect to the DNA from the Slaten case, despite their conclusions. So they settled on the choice to acquire his DNA for testing without his insight. They did this by taking trash containers from Joseph Mills' house and scanning them at the police headquarters for things that could have his DNA. While figuring out the rubbish, they found a piece of medical adhesive tape in one of the packs that they shipped off the investigative laboratory for testing. The investigators investigated his private life in more detail while they awaited the DNA results. He'd spent most of his 58 years in Kathleen, Florida, which was just a short ways from the crime location. He had kids and grandkids and was married too. The outcomes from the investigative laboratory, which were acquired just about 14 days after the fact, showed that the unknown DNA that was found in Plant's DNA on the clinical sticky tape were a precise match. In December 2019, analysts captured Mills and took him in to be interrogated. Back in 1981, Joseph Plants was simply around 20 years of age when he perpetrated the crime. Only one day after the homicide, police likewise addressed him, yet it was via telephone. During the concise call, Mills let investigators know that he dropped him off after football training on September 3rd, 1981, the night prior to the homicide, yet police never thought of him as a suspect. Plants told the police during his scrutinizing that Linda Slaten had supposedly welcomed him over for consensual sex, yet the investigators knew that this was a creation. They reasoned that he designated her even before the evening of the homicide, as he was in many cases seen getting Tim for football training and dropping him off at home after training. All in all, what really occurred the evening of September 3rd, 1981. As per Factory's articulation, Mills had recently dropped him off at his home after football training. Soon thereafter, when nobody was home, he returned and broke in through Linda's window. He then sat tight for her to hit the hay while concealing in her wardrobe. That is the point at which he beat, physically attacked, lastly choked Linda with a wire hanger from her storage room. Joseph Mills conceded to first-degree murder and sexual battery. At his condemning, the Linda's family requested to know why he killed her.
Why? I just want to know why, Joe. Why'd you take my mama from me? I love my mama. We was happy.
All Mills told the court was, "I'm a good person." They didn't get a reaction or a statement of regret from him. Mills was given a lifelong incarceration in jail without the opportunity of parole by the appointed authority. For despite the fact that the Slaten siblings take some comfort from the information that Mills won't ever escape from jail alive, they're rankled by the way that he enjoyed this years while they spent most of their lives without their mom. For Tim, it was something absolutely startling, since Coach Joe was a good example for him once upon a time.
He'd ask us how the case was going. He wouldn't ask questions about it. He just, is any new news or any new leads? And I was like, no, nothing, you know.
Right up to the present day, Tim doesn't really accept that his mom's killer was truly the individual he trusted the most. Tim even says, "I've been carrying the killer's picture in my house at this table the whole time and never had a clue." Jeff, who was totally deprived, still ponders what life could have been assuming that Linda were as yet alive. Tim and Jeff remain very close after this occurrence. They much of the time visit their mom's grave, and Jeff generally lights a flame on the commemoration of her passing. Regardless of all that has happened to them, they've tried constantly to make every second count for their mom. We sure didn't anticipate the result of this chilly case. What was your take about this bent case? Do allow us to have at least some idea your thought process in the comments beneath and your like. For more crime content like this, subscribe our channel. We are happy to see you in our next video.